Engineers struggled with a complex ship engine until the Admiral called a forgotten Navy genius. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Deep in the heart of the naval shipyard, engineers were struggling with a problem they couldn't solve. The USS Venture, a massive destroyer with state-of-the-art technology, had a critical engine failure that no one could figure out. It wasn't just any malfunction. It was a deeply complex issue, one that caused the entire ship's propulsion system to fail. The engineers had already run diagnostics, swapped out parts, and consulted the manuals, but nothing worked. Frustration grew as hours turned into days. The team was at their wits' end, and the higher-ups were starting to question their competence. The lead engineer, a man in his mid-30s named Ethan, stood over the massive engine, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We're missing something," Ethan muttered to himself, tapping the control panel. But what? His team, a group of skilled but now exhausted engineers, gathered around him. They too were struggling to make sense of the mess in front of them. Then, from the corner of the room, an older man caught their attention. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but his eyes were sharp and observant. It was just an old man. No one in the room had seen him before. He stood quietly by the door, watching them work. His name was Jack Morris. A few people glanced at him, but no one bothered to acknowledge his presence. He looked like he was just another retired sailor, past his prime, someone who didn't belong here in the state-of-the-art engineering bay. One of the engineers, a young man named Matt, snickered as he wiped grease from his hands. "Can I help you, old-timer?" he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. Jack's eyes didn't waver, but there was a slight glint in them. He slowly approached the team, his movements deliberate. "You're working on the Venture's engine?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that stopped everyone in their tracks. Ethan turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, what's it to you?" "Well," Jack replied, his gaze flicking to the engine. "I worked on this ship when it was first built, back when it wasn't just a bunch of fancy tech and complex systems. There's something simple you're overlooking." A silence fell over the room. Jack's words seemed almost laughable. What could this old man possibly know about modern technology? Ethan shook his head. "Sorry, but we've already tried everything. We've got every piece of equipment running diagnostics. We don't need your help." Jack didn't flinch. "No, you don't. But you'll never fix it with that attitude." Ethan felt a slight irritation rise in his chest. Who did this guy think he was, coming in and challenging their expertise? Matt, sensing an opportunity to poke fun, crossed his arms. "Yeah, Grandpa. Maybe you should go back to the tool shed. These things are way beyond your time." The engineers chuckled, but Jack didn't react. Instead, he walked toward the engine, his steps steady and sure. Without a word, he knelt down beside it and reached for a panel that none of the engineers had thought to check. He pried it open with ease. "You've got a faulty sensor here," Jack said, pointing to a small, hidden component that had somehow evaded their diagnostics. "This part was always a weak spot when they built these ships. You won't find it in the manual, but it's been an issue from the start." Ethan's jaw dropped as Jack worked quickly, pulling out the part and inspecting it with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. "How did you?" Ethan began, but was interrupted as Jack snapped the part back into place. The engine roared to life, a low hum filling the room. The lights on the control panel blinked green, signaling that the engine was functioning properly once again. The engineers stood there, stunned, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Jack stood up slowly, dusting off his hands. "Told you it was simple," he said with a smile, before walking toward the door. But before he could leave, Ethan turned to him. "Who are you?" he asked, still in disbelief. Jack paused, his back to them. "Just someone who knows this ship better than most." As Jack exited the room, the engineers were left in stunned silence. They had just been shown how their modern tech had missed what was so simple and obvious to someone with years of experience. Just as the team began to recover from the shock, a man in a naval uniform entered the room. His expression was grim, and he immediately walked over to Ethan. "What happened here?" he asked. Ethan looked up, still processing what had just occurred. We fixed it, thanks to an old veteran who knew the ship better than we did. The officer's eyes widened slightly. That wasn't just any old veteran, he said, his voice filled with respect. That was Jack Morris. He's a legend. He saved this ship more times than you can count. The engineers stood in awe, their minds racing with the realization of what they had just witnessed. Jack Morris wasn't just any retired sailor. He was a forgotten Navy genius. The engineers stood frozen, staring at the humming engine, the panels now glowing with bright green lights. The ship's propulsion system was fully operational again, something they had struggled with for days. The young engineers exchanged looks of disbelief, still processing what had just happened. They had tried everything. They had consulted their best diagnostic equipment, analyzed every part of the engine, and still, it had been the quiet old man, Jack Morris, who had solved it with what seemed like a simple observation. As the engineers recovered from their shock, a figure in a Navy uniform entered the room. It was the captain, and he moved with a sense of purpose. His face was grim, and there was a slight edge of urgency in his step. He looked directly at Ethan, who stood near the engine. "What happened here?" the captain asked, his voice demanding an answer. Ethan blinked, still stunned. He had just witnessed a man, who was nothing more than a retired sailor, do what a whole team of experts couldn't. "We fixed it," Ethan said, still trying to make sense of it all. "We couldn't figure it out, but this old veteran." He came in, looked at the engine for a minute, and knew exactly what was wrong. The captain's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. He paused for a moment, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "That wasn't just any old veteran," he said, his voice now tinged with a mixture of respect and awe. "That was Jack Morris. He's a legend." The engineers, including Ethan, stood in stunned silence. "Jack Morris?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "The same Jack Morris who worked on this ship back when it was first commissioned?" The captain nodded slowly, his expression more serious than ever. "The very same. He saved this ship on more than one occasion. During its early missions, Jack was the go-to guy when things went wrong with the engine. He could fix things that no one else could, even under fire. He was the best mechanic the Navy ever had." Ethan's mind raced as he thought back to the old man who had quietly walked into their workspace. Jack had looked like any other retiree, wearing a simple jacket, his hands weathered by years of hard work. There was no sign of the genius the captain spoke of. No indication that this man had once been a key part of the ship's success. "He's the reason this ship is still afloat," the captain continued, his voice dropping lower. "Back in the day, Jack was responsible for keeping this ship running through some of the toughest conditions. It was his knowledge and experience that kept the engines going when we didn't have the advanced technology we have today." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. They had all underestimated Jack. They had laughed at his simple appearance and dismissed him as just another retired sailor. They hadn't realized that the wisdom of years of experience had more value than all their cutting-edge tools and diagnostic equipment. As the captain spoke, Ethan found himself feeling a mix of admiration and shame. How could they have been so blind? How could they have missed the obvious solution that was right in front of them? The captain turned to face the engineers, his tone stern. "You've just witnessed something that should have been a lesson for you all," he said. "Don't ever let your pride or your assumptions get in the way of learning from those who have been through it all. Jack Morris didn't need a computer or a fancy diagnostic tool to fix that engine. He had something far more valuable: experience. Respect it." The room fell silent. The engineers stood there, taking in the gravity of what had just happened. Ethan couldn't shake the image of Jack, walking out of the room, his hands still moving with the precision of a man who had spent his life fixing machines. They had doubted him, laughed at him, and now they had seen the result of their mistake. Just as the captain was about to leave, he turned back toward Ethan and the team. "By the way, you're going to need to thank Jack. He doesn't do this for the recognition. He does it because it's what he knows. That's the kind of man he is. So next time, show some respect." With that, the captain left the room, leaving the engineers standing in stunned silence. The reality of what had just occurred began to settle in. Jack Morris, the old veteran, was no longer just a retired sailor. He was a living legend, and they had all underestimated him. They had thought they were the experts, the ones with the degrees, the fancy equipment, and the credentials. But Jack had proven something far more important. That experience and humility were worth more than all the technology in the world. As the team began to clean up and return to their work, Ethan couldn't help but think about the old man. He realized that the real lesson wasn't just about fixing the engine. It was about respecting those who came before you, about recognizing that there is always more to learn, no matter how advanced the tools or how young the engineers. Jack Morris had shown them that, and they would never forget it. The engineers gathered in the break room, their minds still reeling from the events that had unfolded just hours before. The engine was up and running again, a feat no one had thought possible, and they all knew it was thanks to Jack Morris, the old veteran who had quietly walked in and solved the problem with an ease that defied their expectations. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the moment Jack had fixed the engine. He had approached the ship's massive machinery with such confidence, as if he had been doing this his whole life. But it wasn't just skill. There was something deeper, something that had to do with experience, with knowing the ship and its history in a way that the engineers, despite all their training and technology, couldn't. As they sat around the table, the conversation inevitably turned to Jack. "Who is he?" "Really?" Matt asked, his voice laced with both admiration and curiosity. "I mean, how did he just walk in and fix it? He doesn't look like he'd know anything about the modern tech we use." Ethan shook his head. "It's not about the tech. He saw something we missed. It's like he's been around this ship long enough to know its soul. He's a living legend." The captain's voice cut through the conversation as he entered the break room. He stood in the doorway, his posture firm, his expression serious. "Jack Morris has been with this ship from the very beginning. He's fixed things you couldn't even imagine, and done it under circumstances that would have broken most men." The engineers fell silent, each of them processing what the captain had just said. The captain walked into the room, leaning against the counter as he spoke. "I've known Jack for years. He doesn't look like much, does he? Just an old man in a jacket, maybe even a little broken down by age. But you've seen what he can do, haven't you? He's forgotten more about this ship than most of you will ever know." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. How could they have underestimated Jack? How could they have thought that their fancy tools and technology would have been enough to solve the problem, when it had taken an old man's experience to do what they couldn't? "He saved this ship on more than one occasion," the captain continued, his voice tinged with respect. "When we didn't have the modern tools, Jack was the one who kept us afloat. He can fix things with his bare hands that most of you wouldn't even know how to approach." The room was silent, each engineer lost in thought. Ethan looked around at his team, his mind racing with the realization that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The truth was, Jack wasn't just a mechanic. He was a piece of living history, a man who had seen and done things that would be lost to time if it weren't for people like him. "He doesn't ask for recognition," the captain added, breaking the silence. "He's not here for the praise. He does it because he loves the ship, because he's dedicated to it, and to the men and women who serve on it. He doesn't need anyone's validation, but he deserves your respect." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. The captain was right. Jack had come in, solved their biggest problem, and walked away without expecting a single thank you. He hadn't done it for the recognition. He had done it because that was who he was. Jack Morris wasn't just a forgotten Navy genius. He was the heart and soul of the ship, and it was time the engineers recognized that. "I've seen men come and go, but Jack is different," the captain said, his voice softening slightly. "He's the kind of man who makes the impossible possible. And it's not just about fixing engines. It's about knowing the ship, knowing what it's capable of, and knowing what it needs. He has a connection with it that you can't learn from a manual or a computer." Ethan stood up from the table, his mind made up. "We need to thank him, not just for fixing the engine, but for everything he's done, for the years of knowledge, the quiet dedication, the sacrifices. He deserves to know that we see him." The other engineers nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. They had been wrong to dismiss him, wrong to assume that their modern technology was enough. They had underestimated the value of experience, the power of knowledge passed down through the years. And now, they understood. Jack Morris wasn't just a retired mechanic. He was a living legend, and they were lucky to have him. "I'll go find him," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'll make sure he knows how much we appreciate him." The captain smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "You don't have to find him. He'll be back when he's needed. And when he comes back, make sure you're ready to listen." With that, the engineers went back to work, their hearts and minds focused not just on the tasks at hand, but on the lesson they had just learned. Experience and respect were more valuable than anything technology could offer. And Jack Morris? He was a reminder of that truth. The engineers had been working tirelessly for the past several hours. The buzz of tools and machinery had subsided as they walked out of the engine room, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. They had learned something today, something that would stick with them long after the day was over. They had learned that sometimes, the real solution doesn't come from high-tech tools or the latest software. Sometimes, it comes from a place much older, much more grounded. Jack Morris had fixed the ship's engine in a matter of minutes, something that no one, not even the best engineers with their state-of-the-art technology, had been able to do. The engineers were left in awe, but also with a sense of humility that none of them had ever experienced before. They were all experts in their own right, but Jack had shown them that no matter how skilled they were, there was always something new to learn. The team had gathered outside for a short break, but none of them spoke immediately. The events of the day had left them speechless. Ethan, the lead engineer, finally broke the silence. "I still can't believe it," he said, rubbing his hand over his face. "I mean, we were all ready to give up on that engine. We thought we had done everything." Matt, the younger engineer who had mocked Jack earlier, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "Yeah, he paused, swallowing his pride. "I thought it was over too. But he came in and just knew what to do. Like he's been working on this ship for years." Ethan nodded slowly. "Because he has. Jack's not just some old guy who knows how to fix things. He's been a part of this ship's history since the beginning. We've all been so focused on our fancy equipment and new tech that we forgot one of the most important tools we have: experience." The other engineers nodded in agreement, but Matt's face still held a hint of disbelief. "So what now?" he asked. "Do we just sit here and wait for him to come back every time something breaks?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think the real question is, do we learn from him? Do we recognize the value in the knowledge that's been passed down to us? Because if we don't, then we're just going to keep making the same mistakes." The captain, who had been standing nearby, overheard their conversation. He walked over to them, his expression more relaxed than before. "You're all right," he said, his voice a little softer. "Jack's not going to be around all the time. He's a man of few words, and when he does come around, it's because he's needed. But you all have to be ready to recognize what he can offer." Ethan looked at the captain, a sense of respect growing in him. "We will," he said, nodding. "We've learned a lot today." The captain smiled. "Good. Because Jack's not the only one who can make things happen on this ship. You all have your skills, too. But don't forget that there's always room to grow." With that, the captain turned and walked back toward the ship. The engineers stood there for a moment longer, each of them contemplating what had just been said. They had witnessed something extraordinary today, and they knew it was a lesson that they would carry with them for the rest of their careers. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set over the shipyard, Ethan walked to the hangar where he knew Jack would be. The old veteran was there, just as he had expected, leaning against the wall with a mug of coffee in his hands. Jack didn't look up as Ethan approached. He simply took a sip from his mug, waiting. "I just wanted to thank you," Ethan said, his voice a little hesitant. "For what you did today. You saved the ship." Jack didn't respond right away, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if the old man had even heard him. But then Jack spoke, his voice low and steady. "I didn't save the ship. The ship's been fine. I just helped it keep running. You all have the tools to do it. But it's not about the tools. It's about knowing when to use them." Ethan stood silent for a moment, processing what Jack had said. "I think I understand," he said finally. Jack nodded once, a small, approving gesture. "Good. Just don't forget what you learned today." With that, Jack turned and walked away, his steps slow but sure. Ethan watched him go, feeling a sense of gratitude and respect he hadn't expected. Jack Morris had taught him something far more valuable than just how to fix an engine. He had taught him about humility, about the power of experience, and about the importance of never stopping the learning process. As the day drew to a close, Ethan returned to the ship with a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just an engineer working with the latest technology. He was a student of the ship's history, and he would carry Jack's lessons with him every time he worked on it. He knew now that the ship wasn't just a machine. It was a living entity, one that needed respect and care from those who worked on it. And with that knowledge, He was ready to take on whatever challenges came next. The days that followed were quieter than usual. The engineers, now humbled and inspired by what they had witnessed, worked with a renewed sense of purpose. They had always prided themselves on their skills and cutting-edge technology, but now they understood that there was something more valuable than just the latest diagnostic tools. Experience, wisdom, and respect for those who had been through it all held the true power. Jack Morris, the man they had once dismissed as a relic, had changed their perspective forever. Ethan, still reflecting on the lesson Jack had taught him, found himself in the engine room more than ever. He wasn't just repairing engines anymore. He was learning from the ship, from its history, and from the men who had kept it running before him. The ship had a soul, and the engineers were beginning to understand how to care for it. It was early morning when the call came through. The USS Venture had been scheduled for a critical mission, and the engine had to be fully operational, ready to carry the crew through treacherous waters. Ethan and his team worked tirelessly, running diagnostics, checking every part, and double-checking their work. They were confident this time. It had been days since Jack had come in and fixed the engine, and they were ready to prove that they could keep it running smoothly. As the team worked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had checked the engine a dozen times, but there was an uneasy feeling gnawing at him. It wasn't a technical issue. It was a gut feeling, something he couldn't quite explain. He stepped back from the engine, wiping his brow. He looked at his team, each one of them working diligently, but no one seemed to notice the subtle vibrations that had begun to grow stronger. It was only when Matt, the young engineer who had been most vocal in doubting Jack, spoke up that Ethan snapped out of his thoughts. "Hey, Ethan, I don't know about you, but the engine's making a weird sound," Matt said, his tone cautious. Ethan turned his attention back to the ship's heart, the engine, and he realized that Matt was right. The hum was off, the vibrations were sharper, and the lights flickered momentarily. His heart skipped a beat. "Check the lower chamber," he said, his voice tight. The engineers scrambled to inspect the area, but no one could find anything immediately wrong. As the tension grew, the sound grew louder, a low, rumbling noise that seemed to come from deep within the ship's core. Ethan knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. They had to get to the bottom of this before the mission was compromised. "We need to call Jack," Ethan muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of his own pride. Matt, who had once mocked the old man, hesitated. "You think he'll come back?" "He'll come back," Ethan replied firmly. There was no doubt in his mind now. They needed Jack, just like they had before. Without another word, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed the number Jack had given him. The phone rang a few times before Jack's gravelly voice answered. "Yeah, Jack, it's Ethan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've got a problem with the engine. Something's not right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ethan could almost hear Jack thinking. "Where are you?" Jack asked simply. "The engine room," Ethan replied, his hand gripping the phone tighter. "I'm coming." With that, the call ended. It wasn't long before the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Jack appeared, his familiar presence cutting through the tension in the air. The engineers turned to look at him, and for the first time, none of them doubted his abilities. He walked past them without a word, heading straight for the engine. The moment Jack laid his eyes on the engine, he knew. It wasn't just the usual issue. Something deeper had gone wrong, something that the modern diagnostics couldn't catch. He knelt down, his hands moving with the same confidence and expertise Ethan had seen before. The engineers watched in awe as Jack carefully pried open a hidden compartment and inspected a small but crucial component. He didn't say much, just worked in silence, his hands steady and sure. After a few moments, he stood up and wiped his hands on his jacket. "You missed a faulty valve," Jack said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his experience. Ethan's heart sank. They had checked everything. How had they missed this? "I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice filled with frustration. "Why didn't the diagnostics catch it?" Jack shrugged. "Diagnostics can only tell you what they're programmed to find. They don't know the ship like I do." With that, Jack replaced the faulty valve, and the hum of the engine returned to its usual smooth rhythm. The lights flickered back to life, and the vibration subsided. Ethan stood there, stunned. He had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Jack Morris wasn't just a genius when it came to fixing engines. He was a genius because he understood the ship on a level that no amount of technology or modern equipment could match. As Jack walked out of the room, Ethan turned to the team, a new sense of respect in his eyes. "We've got a lot to learn," he said quietly. The engineers nodded in agreement, their previous doubts gone. Jack had shown them something they would never forget. It wasn't just about fixing the engine. It was about understanding it, respecting it, and knowing when to trust experience over technology. The following week, the engineers worked on the USS Venture with a newfound respect for the ship and its history. The tension that had once hung in the air was now replaced with a shared understanding of the lessons learned. Jack Morris had not only fixed the engine, but had also ignited a sense of humility in the team. Ethan, still feeling the weight of his previous doubts, found himself in the engine room more than ever. He wasn't just checking the parts. He was observing, learning, and appreciating the intricacies of the ship that he had once overlooked. The rest of the team followed suit, eager to take in as much as they could from the ship and from the wisdom Jack had passed down. But the ship wasn't the only thing that had changed. Ethan had become more patient, more open to the idea that experience was as valuable, if not more so, than technology. He no longer dismissed the old ways of doing things. Instead, he embraced the idea that sometimes the most straightforward solutions were the ones that worked best. One evening, as the team was wrapping up for the day, the captain walked into the engine room with a serious look on his face. "Ethan, I need to speak with you," he said, motioning for Ethan to step aside. "Sure, Captain. What's going on?" Ethan asked, his mind racing. "We've got a situation. The ship's set to leave for a mission in less than 48 hours, but we've run into an issue with the radar system. It's showing signs of failure, and I'm not sure we'll make it out of port if it doesn't get fixed." Ethan's heart sank. The radar system was one of the most crucial pieces of equipment on the ship. Without it, the Venture would be blind to incoming threats. "We've already had the radar technicians look at it, but they've been unsuccessful," the captain continued. "I don't know who else to turn to." Ethan's mind raced as he thought of their options. The engineers had worked tirelessly to keep the ship running, but this was a whole different challenge. He looked around the engine room and then back at the captain. "I think I know someone who can help," Ethan said slowly. "Who?" the captain asked, raising an eyebrow. "Jack," Ethan replied. The captain's face shifted. "You're serious?" "Jack hasn't worked on radar systems in years. He's been out of that game for a long time." "I know," Ethan said, "but Jack's the kind of guy who knows things that no one else does. He might just be the solution we need." After a moment of silence, the captain sighed and nodded. "All right, let's give it a shot." They called Jack, who arrived at the ship later that afternoon. His familiar quiet presence was immediately felt as he stepped into the engine room. He didn't ask many questions, just got straight to work. Ethan had no idea if Jack had any experience with radar systems, but he trusted him in a way that went beyond technical knowledge. Jack walked up to the radar console and studied the system. He didn't speak at first, just observed, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. The rest of the engineers stood nearby, watching him with a mix of curiosity and awe. After a long silence, Jack finally spoke. "It's not the radar itself that's the problem," he said, his voice steady. "It's the power source. There's a loose connection that's causing intermittent failures. You won't find it with your diagnostics. You've got to look for the things that aren't showing up." Ethan exchanged glances with his team. It made sense. They had been so focused on the radar itself that they hadn't considered the power supply. Jack's simple observation had already saved them hours of work. Without further hesitation, Jack set to work. His hands moved with practiced precision, undoing the connections and fixing the power issue. The engineers watched in silence, a mixture of respect and disbelief in their eyes. After a few minutes, Jack stepped back and wiped his hands on his jacket. "That should do it," he said. "Test it now." The engineers quickly ran the diagnostics again. This time, the radar system came online smoothly, with no errors or glitches. It was functioning perfectly. Ethan's heart lifted with relief. They had made it just in time. "You did it again," Ethan said, looking at Jack with newfound admiration. Jack simply nodded, as if it was all in a day's work. "It's not about the tech," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's about knowing where to look and when to trust your instincts. Sometimes, the answers are simple, but you've got to be willing to see them." The captain walked over and gave Jack a firm handshake. I can't thank you enough, he said. You've saved us from a serious problem. Jack smiled slightly. Just doing my part. As Jack turned to leave, Ethan stopped him. Jack, I think I owe you more than just a thank you, he said. Jack raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You've taught us something that goes beyond fixing engines or radar systems, Ethan said. You've shown us the value of experience, of trusting the basics, and of respecting the ship and the people who keep it running. Jack nodded. You've got it, kid. Now, don't forget what you've learned. With that, Jack walked out of the engine room, leaving the engineers with a newfound sense of respect not only for the ship, but for the knowledge and wisdom that came with experience. The Venture was ready for its mission, thanks to Jack Morris, the forgotten Navy genius who had saved the day once again. The next few days were filled with a sense of purpose and urgency. The USS Venture was ready to depart, and the crew had completed the final preparations. As the ship sailed toward its next mission, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. It was strange how quickly things had changed. Just a few weeks ago, he had been so sure of his knowledge and skills. He had believed that the latest technology was the key to solving every problem. But now, after all that had happened with Jack, Ethan saw the world through a different lens. He had learned that there was more to being an engineer than simply having the right tools. It was about understanding, patience, and, above all, respect for those who came before him. The ship's mission was a critical one, and the stakes were high. As the Venture navigated through the open seas, the crew knew they had to be prepared for anything. The weather was unpredictable, and the waters were known to be treacherous. It wasn't long before the ship ran into trouble. A sudden storm hit with little warning, and the Venture was caught in the middle of violent waves and howling winds. The crew worked together to secure the ship, but the storm was relentless. Ethan stood in the control room, watching the radar system as the storm raged outside. It was one of the most intense storms he had ever seen, but he wasn't afraid. He had seen how quickly the Venture could be stabilized when things went wrong, and he knew that Jack's lessons were in the back of his mind, guiding him. How's the radar holding up? The captain's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Ethan quickly turned to the captain. It's stable for now, but the storm is interfering with some of the readings. We'll need to keep an eye on it. The captain nodded, his face grim. Keep me updated. This storm's no joke. The tension in the room was palpable. Outside, the storm seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. The crew worked quickly, adjusting the ship's course to avoid the worst of the storm's fury. The radar system flickered occasionally, its readings interrupted by the intense interference caused by the storm. But as the minutes turned into hours, the engineers managed to maintain control of the ship. Ethan felt a sense of calm as he watched the crew work together. They had become a team, not just a group of engineers. They were all in this together. As the storm began to subside, the crew received another challenge. A critical malfunction in one of the ship's engines started to emerge, and Ethan knew that they couldn't afford to lose time. If the malfunction wasn't addressed quickly, the ship wouldn't be able to continue its mission. Ethan turned to his team. We need to act fast, he said, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. Check the engine diagnostics. Let's see what's going on. The team sprang into action, but as they worked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The engine was acting up in a way that didn't make sense. The diagnostics were showing minor issues, but nothing that should have caused a major malfunction. That's when he remembered Jack. He had learned from Jack that sometimes the problem wasn't something that could be detected by the usual tools. Sometimes it was about understanding the ship at a deeper level. Without hesitating, Ethan grabbed the phone and dialed Jack's number. It rang a few times before Jack answered. What's up? Jack's voice was calm, almost relaxed. We've got a problem with one of the engines, Ethan said quickly. The diagnostics don't show anything major, but something's wrong. We need your help. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Where are you? Jack asked. Ethan quickly explained the situation. I'll be there in a few, Jack said before hanging up. True to his word, Jack arrived on the ship within an hour. He walked into the engine room, his presence immediately putting Ethan and the team at ease. As always, Jack didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He went straight to the engine, knelt down, and began to inspect it. The engineers stood back, watching with a sense of awe. Jack didn't look at the diagnostics. He didn't need to. He simply reached for a part of the engine and began working with the precision of someone who had spent decades in this very room. "You're missing a small component," Jack said quietly, as if he were speaking to himself. "It's not showing up in the diagnostics because it's too small to be detected by the system. But without it, the engine can't operate at full capacity." Ethan's eyes widened. He had never even considered that. Jack quickly replaced the missing component and stepped back. The engine immediately roared to life, its hum smooth and steady once again. Ethan let out a sigh of relief. "How did you know that?" he asked, still in disbelief. Jack smiled faintly, looking up at him. "I've been doing this for a long time. You get to know the ship, and when you know the ship, you know what to look for." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the man who had shown him the true value of experience. The team worked together to complete the final checks, and as the ship set sail once again, Ethan felt confident that they were ready for whatever came next. The storm had tested them, but it had also brought them closer together. The lessons Jack had taught them would stay with them for the rest of their careers. And as the USS Venture continued its mission, they knew they had the knowledge and the strength to face any challenge that came their way. The days that followed were calmer, but the lessons learned from the storm remained fresh in everyone's mind. The USS Venture sailed smoothly, its crew working together more cohesively than ever. The engine had been running without a hitch, and the radar system, which had once been a source of constant worry, now hummed quietly in the background. Ethan walked the ship often, checking in with the engineers, making sure that everything was running as it should. But as the ship moved farther from shore, the crew's confidence began to grow, and with it, the realization that they had proven something to themselves. The Venture was a force to be reckoned with, and the team was stronger than ever. But there was still one thing left to do. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He hadn't seen Jack since the radar issue had been resolved, and though the ship was running smoothly, Ethan felt a strange sense of longing. It was as if something had been left unfinished. He found himself in the engine room one evening, checking the machinery for any irregularities, when he heard the familiar sound of footsteps. He turned around, and there stood Jack, as if he had never left. "Thought you might need some company," Jack said with a half-smile, stepping into the room. Ethan smiled, feeling an immense sense of relief wash over him. "We've been holding things together, but it feels like something's still missing," Ethan said, rubbing his forehead. Jack looked around, studying the engine with the same calm, assured expression that Ethan had come to recognize. "You're doing well. But sometimes, you need more than just the engine to keep a ship running," Jack said, his voice low. "It's not just about fixing things. It's about understanding what makes everything tick." Ethan furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "The ship, the crew, the people who work on it. All of it. You can fix the engines, adjust the radar, and navigate the storm, but without understanding the bigger picture, you're just doing a job. You're not making the ship your own." Ethan paused, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. He had been focused so much on the technical aspects of the job that he hadn't thought about the deeper connection between the crew, the ship, and the work they did. Jack's words were a reminder that there was more to this mission than just maintenance and repairs. It was about understanding the heart of the ship, the people who made it run. "It's not just the engine. It's the people," Ethan said slowly. "Exactly," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the room. "You've got the knowledge now. But what you do with it, how you apply it to the people who work with you, that's what will really make a difference." Ethan nodded. "I think I understand now." "Good. You've got a good crew here," Jack said. "But don't forget to lead them. Don't just fix the ship. Help them understand it, too." Jack's presence was a steady force, a reminder of the value of experience and the wisdom that came with it. Ethan realized that Jack wasn't just a mechanic or a technician. He was a mentor, a guide, someone who had seen enough of the world to know what really mattered. Jack had taught them more than just how to repair machinery. He had taught them how to connect with the work, how to connect with the ship, and how to understand the people who kept it running. As Jack turned to leave, Ethan found himself smiling, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't had before. He wasn't just ready to keep the ship running. He was ready to lead it, and everyone aboard it, toward something greater. The mission was just beginning, and the Venture, with its crew and its legacy, was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jack's lessons had given them the strength they needed, and with that strength, they would sail into whatever came next with confidence and purpose. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a symbol of the crew's dedication, of the lessons they had learned, and of the legacy that would carry them forward. As the Venture sailed on, Ethan stood at the helm, watching the horizon. He wasn't just steering the ship. He was steering the future of a crew, a ship, and a mission that had become more than just a job. It had become a way of life, a way of respecting the past, while moving forward toward the future. The USS Venture had been out at sea for several weeks now, making its way through increasingly dangerous waters. The crew had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their work, their every task a careful balance of skill and cooperation. But the pressure was starting to mount. The mission they had embarked on was critical, and every move they made was scrutinized by the higher-ups. Ethan could feel the weight of it on his shoulders. He wasn't just an engineer anymore. He was a leader, and the responsibility of keeping the ship running smoothly was no longer just a job for him. It was personal. The lesson Jack had taught him about leadership, about understanding the ship and the crew, was something Ethan had taken to heart. He had begun to see his role in a new light. It wasn't enough to just fix the machines. He had to take care of the people who worked on them. It was his job to lead, to make sure that the crew was functioning as a team and not just a collection of individuals. As the ship sailed through another dark night, with waves crashing against its sides, Ethan stood on the deck, looking out over the vast expanse of water. He could feel the weight of the mission ahead, the uncertainty of what lay beyond the horizon. The storm clouds were gathering again, and they had to be ready for whatever came next. He was interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "You all right?" It was Jack. The old man had become a regular presence. On the ship, always nearby, always observing. Ethan turned to face him. "Yeah, just thinking. We're heading into some rough waters. The mission is getting more dangerous with every mile." Jack nodded. "I can feel it too. But you're doing good. You've learned the right lessons. You know what you're doing." Ethan smiled, but there was a nervous edge to his voice. "I hope so. I never realized how much pressure there was to keep everything running until now. It's not just about fixing the machines. It's about the people who rely on them." Jack chuckled softly. "That's the truth. Machines break down. People can too. That's why you have to understand them. All of them. The ship, the equipment, and the people working with you. You can't just be an expert in one thing. You have to be an expert in all of it." Ethan looked out at the ocean again, the dark waves crashing against the ship's hull. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for it. We've got so many people depending on us to get this right." "You're ready," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've got the experience now. You know how to read the ship, how to read the crew. You just have to trust yourself." Ethan turned back to face Jack, the older man's words sinking in. Jack had been right all along. It wasn't just about the engines, the radar, or the technology. It was about understanding the bigger picture. The crew was just as important as the ship. The mission was just as important as the machines that powered it. With a newfound sense of determination, Ethan nodded. "Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it." Jack gave him a small smile. "Anytime." The next few days were filled with tension. The storm clouds continued to gather, and the crew prepared for what was sure to be a difficult journey. As the Venture navigated through treacherous waters, the crew worked seamlessly together, each person doing their part. Ethan made sure to check in with everyone, ensuring that they had what they needed and that they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. It wasn't just about keeping the ship running anymore. It was about keeping the team together, keeping them focused. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the heart of the storm. Waves crashed against the ship with increasing force, and the wind howled through the rigging. The crew had been through rough waters before, but this storm felt different. It felt like the test that would decide their fate. Ethan stood at the helm, watching the storm roll in. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment that would define their mission, and he couldn't afford to let fear take hold. The ship groaned under the strain of the waves, but it held steady. The radar system, tested so many times before, flickered for a moment before coming back online, guiding them through the swirling chaos. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel tightly, and he felt the weight of every decision he had made up to this point. The crew had put their trust in him, and now it was time to show them he could lead them through this. "Status report." The captain's voice cut through the storm's fury. Ethan quickly relayed the information, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "The engines are holding steady. Radar is functioning. We're on course." "Good," the captain said. "Keep it steady." The storm raged on for what felt like hours, but slowly, the winds began to die down. The ship pressed forward, its hull cutting through the waves. When the storm finally passed, the sky cleared, revealing a calm, dark ocean beneath them. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The crew had made it through, not just because of the ship's strength or the equipment, but because they had worked together as a team. They had trusted each other and trusted their leader. As the ship sailed on, Ethan stood at the helm, looking out at the horizon. The storm had tested them, but it had also shown them what they were made of. They were ready for whatever came next. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew that he would lead them through it, with the lessons Jack had taught him guiding every decision. The Venture was more than just a ship now. It was a symbol of their strength, their unity, and their unwavering commitment to the mission. The days following the storm were marked by a new sense of clarity aboard the USS Venture. The crew, having faced their first true test together, moved with a sense of unity that had not been present before. The mission was far from over, but the ship had weathered its first major challenge, and now there was a renewed confidence in every engineer's step, in every sailor's voice. The calm after the storm was not only a relief, but a reminder that the crew was capable of handling whatever came their way. Ethan walked the halls of the ship, reflecting on how far they had come. The pressure had been immense, yet they had come together as a team. The systems were all working as they should, the ship was steady, and the crew seemed more connected than ever before. But Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. They were still out there, somewhere in the vast ocean, with miles of open water ahead of them and unknown dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. The mission they were on was not going to be easy, and he had no illusions about the challenges that lay ahead. As he made his way through the ship, Ethan found himself in the engine room once again, not out of necessity, but because he felt a strange sense of peace there. The engines, which had once seemed like just machines to him, had become more than that. They were the heart of the ship, and he was beginning to feel a deep connection to them, as Jack had taught him. Jack had not only fixed engines, he had taught Ethan to respect them, to understand their rhythm, their needs, and their potential. Ethan had learned that the key to leading this crew was not just technical knowledge, but an understanding of the ship itself, of what made it tick. As Ethan stood by the massive engine, lost in thought, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. It was Jack, of course. Jack had been a steady presence on the ship since the storm, though his appearances were brief. The old man's presence was a silent reminder of the lessons he had imparted. Still thinking? Jack asked, his voice as calm as ever. Ethan turned to face him, a slight smile on his face. Yeah, just trying to process everything that's happened. We've come a long way, but I know this mission is far from over. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the engine with a practiced gaze. It's always a long way. But that's the thing. You can't let the distance overwhelm. You take it one step at a time. One part at a time. Ethan sighed. I guess I'm still getting used to the pressure. But you're right. It's all about taking it one step at a time. Jack studied him for a moment before speaking again. You're doing good, Ethan. I see it. You've learned the lessons. You're leading this ship, not just fixing it. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at Jack's words. For the first time, he truly felt like he was the one in charge. Not because of his title or his knowledge, but because he had earned the respect of his crew and the ship itself. Thanks, Jack, Ethan said. I couldn't have done it without you. Jack smiled faintly. You did the work, kid. I just gave you a little push. As they stood there in the engine room, the hum of the ship filling the space around them, Ethan realized that Jack was right. The work was never really done. The ship was a living, breathing thing, and it required constant care and attention. It wasn't just about keeping the engines running or fixing the radar. It was about understanding the ship, understanding the crew, and keeping both in harmony. The ship's journey was just beginning. The crew was now stronger, more united, and more prepared than ever to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The horizon stretched before them, full of uncertainty, but also full of potential. And with Jack's lessons guiding him, Ethan felt ready to take on anything. The Venture wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of their teamwork, their growth, and their resolve. As the days turned into weeks, the crew continued to sail forward, their bond strengthening with every task they faced. The mission had brought them together, but it was the lessons they had learned, from the engines to the crew, that would carry them through the hardest of times. Ethan knew the road ahead would not always be smooth. There would be more storms, more challenges. But he also knew that, with the right mindset and the right team, they would always find their way through. Jack had given him the tools to lead, but it was the ship and its crew that would carry them to the end of this journey. And with that thought in his mind, Ethan stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The days aboard the USS Venture were becoming more routine, and yet the pressure never truly lifted. As the ship sailed deeper into unfamiliar waters, the weight of their mission loomed over the crew. They had all seen firsthand how quickly things could go wrong, and each member of the crew knew that the stakes were only rising. Ethan had taken Jack's lessons to heart. The crew was no longer just a group of technicians and sailors. They were a team, and each person played a crucial role in the success of their mission. They weren't just maintaining the ship, they were becoming a part of it. The next challenge came when the Venture reached a particularly volatile part of their journey, a section of the ocean known for sudden, unpredictable shifts in weather. The ship's course had been carefully charted, but even the best planning couldn't prepare them for the storm that suddenly appeared on the horizon. It had come out of nowhere, and in a matter of hours, the sky darkened, the winds picked up, and the waves grew taller than any of the crew had expected. Ethan was standing on the deck when the first gusts hit, the air thick with moisture and salt. He had seen storms before, but nothing like this. The sea churned with a violent intensity, and the ship began to tilt as the waves crashed against its sides. "Captain, we need to adjust the course," one of the officers shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The captain, looking grim but determined, nodded. "Do it. Steer us clear of the worst of it." Ethan stood there, watching as the crew scrambled to make adjustments, securing equipment, and checking the integrity of the ship. The storm had arrived so quickly that they had no choice but to ride it out and hope that their preparations were enough. Inside the ship, Ethan made his way to the engine room, where he knew the crew would need him most. The engines were the heart of the ship, and if they failed in the middle of the storm, the Venture would be at the mercy of the sea. As he entered the engine room, the noise of the storm outside became muffled, replaced by the steady hum of machinery and the low rumble of the engines. The engineers were working quickly, checking gauges, adjusting dials, and ensuring that everything was functioning properly. "How's it looking?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Everything's holding, but we're pushing the engines hard," one of the engineers replied. "We need to keep them running at full power to stay steady." Ethan nodded. He understood the importance of the engines now more than ever. But even as he checked the systems, he could feel the strain in the air. The storm was testing them all. Hours passed, and the storm continued to rage, pushing the Venture to its limits. The ship groaned with the force of the waves, but it held firm. Ethan and the engineers worked without rest, making small adjustments, monitoring the power levels, and checking every component of the ship's systems. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan felt a sense of calm. It wasn't because the storm was subsiding. It was because the lessons he had learned from Jack were coming into play. The team was operating like a well-oiled machine. Each person knew their role, knew what was expected of them, and trusted that the others would do their part. They were no longer just reacting to the storm, they were working with it. Just as the storm began to show signs of easing, the worst of the turbulence hit. A massive wave struck the ship's starboard side, causing a sudden jolt that threw some of the crew off balance. The engines rattled under the strain, and the power levels began to dip. Ethan's heart raced as he heard the sound of the engines sputtering. "We're losing power," one of the engineers shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran to the control panel, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the engine room, there was no time for panic. "Check the fuel lines," Ethan ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The engineers immediately got to work, checking the systems for any signs of damage. Ethan moved quickly, scanning the diagnostics and listening to the subtle hum of the machinery. It didn't take long for him to identify the issue. A malfunction in the fuel regulator was causing the engines to lose power. The engineers were already on it, but Ethan knew they didn't have much time. The ship was still in danger of being overwhelmed by the storm. With a quick but deliberate motion, Ethan grabbed a nearby wrench and made the necessary adjustments. He felt the pressure mounting with every passing second. But as the engines began to hum steadily again, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Power's back," one of the engineers confirmed. Ethan nodded, his mind still racing. Good. But keep an eye on it. We don't know how long this storm's going to last. The crew worked tirelessly for the next few hours, ensuring the engines and systems were stable, keeping the ship steady in the face of nature's fury. As the storm finally began to dissipate, the tension in the air lifted, and the crew took a collective breath. They had made it through. As the sky cleared, Ethan stood on the deck again, looking out at the vast, calm ocean. The ship had weathered the storm, but it was the crew, working together, that had made it possible. And in that moment, Ethan understood what Jack had meant. It wasn't just about fixing things. It was about leading, trusting, and understanding that a ship, like any team, was only as strong as its people. The journey ahead was still long, but they were ready for whatever came next. The Venture, with its crew and its legacy, was more than just a ship. It was a testament to everything they had learned, and everything they would continue to learn, together. The days after the storm were filled with a sense of quiet confidence. The USS Venture had passed through its toughest challenge yet, and now the crew found themselves in a rhythm, prepared for whatever came next. Ethan, having learned invaluable lessons from both the ship and its crew, continued to lead with the wisdom Jack had imparted. The ship, once just a machine to him, had transformed into something far more meaningful, a living, breathing entity that demanded respect, care, and understanding. But as calm returned to the ocean, a new test emerged, one that would challenge Ethan in ways he hadn't anticipated. Late one night, just as the crew was settling into their routines, an alarm sounded through the ship, breaking the silence. It was a low, steady tone that immediately caught everyone's attention. The crew moved quickly, navigating the hallways with practiced efficiency. Ethan, now more accustomed to the responsibilities of leadership, was already on his way to the control room, his mind racing. The first few reports came in, a significant issue with the communications system. The Venture had lost contact with the fleet, and the backup systems weren't functioning properly. The crew quickly ran diagnostics, trying to locate the source of the failure. Ethan knew this was serious. Without communication, they would be isolated, vulnerable. The mission they were on depended on the coordination of the fleet, and without that link, the risks were far too high. He stood by as the technicians worked, trying to solve the problem. It wasn't just about fixing a piece of equipment. It was about ensuring the safety of the entire crew and possibly the success of the mission itself. As the hours ticked by, frustration began to mount. The systems showed no signs of life, and the clock was ticking down. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. He found himself thinking back to what Jack would have done in this situation. Jack had always been calm in the face of pressure, relying on his experience and intuition to guide him. Ethan realized that he couldn't simply rely on the equipment to solve this. He needed to think outside the box, just like Jack had taught him. He walked to the communications console, watching as the technicians continued to troubleshoot. He examined the system with a critical eye, looking for something that might have been missed. And that's when he saw it, a small indicator light, blinking irregularly. It was almost hidden beneath a panel, overlooked by the crew as they focused on the larger systems. Ethan moved quickly, lifting the panel and inspecting the wiring underneath. A loose connection was causing the issue. The systems had been down because a simple wire had come undone. Without hesitation, Ethan fixed the connection, and as soon as he did, the communications system powered back up. The relief was immediate. The backup systems began functioning, and the link to the fleet was restored. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching the communication systems come back online. It had been a small fix, but it was the kind of thing that could have spiraled out of control if it hadn't been caught in time. As the crew continued their work, Ethan felt a wave of pride wash over him. It wasn't just the technical skill that had saved them. It was the attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and the trust in the knowledge that had been passed down to him. He thought of Jack, of the way the old man always seemed to know when something wasn't right. Jack had taught him that sometimes the smallest details were the most important, and that a calm mind in the face of chaos could be the greatest asset of all. The ship had passed yet another test, but this one felt different. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't just about making the big decisions. It was about the little things, the ones that often went unnoticed, but were crucial nonetheless. Ethan stood at the control room window, looking out over the ocean. The calm waters stretched endlessly before him, but the lessons he had learned were anything but still. They were constantly moving, evolving, shaping him into the leader the crew needed. He wasn't just steering the ship anymore. He was guiding the crew, making sure they stayed on course, and understanding that the ship was more than just a machine. It was a reflection of the crew itself. As the ship continued its mission, Ethan knew that the challenges wouldn't stop. There would be more obstacles, more tests of their resolve. But with the lessons he had learned, with the strength of the crew behind him, and with the wisdom of those like Jack to guide him, he was ready for whatever came next. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a symbol of their shared journey, a reminder of the lessons they had learned and the ones they would continue to learn as they moved forward. And as Ethan looked out at the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Venture was more than just a ship. It was a testament to the strength of its crew and the lessons that would carry them through every storm, every challenge, and every unknown that lay ahead. The USS Venture sailed through the calm ocean as the mission neared its completion. The crew had faced their challenges head-on, with every obstacle strengthening their resolve. Ethan, who had started as just an engineer, now felt fully entrenched in the rhythm of leadership. The lessons learned from Jack and the rest of the crew had shaped him into a leader not by title, but by action, respect, and knowledge. As the ship made its way to its final destination, Ethan couldn't help but think about how far they had come. The team had not just solved mechanical problems. They had built something stronger than just a ship. They had built a foundation of trust and respect that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The communication systems, once a source of constant stress, had become a symbol of their unity. Ethan looked out at the horizon, watching the orange glow of the setting sun. The waters were calm now, but there had been times when it felt like the ship might be overwhelmed by the storm. And yet, here they were, stronger than before, their mission still on course. He knew the work wasn't done. Leadership wasn't a destination. It was a continuous journey of learning, adapting, and guiding others. The crew had proven themselves time and again, but it was not just their technical expertise that had carried them through. It was their ability to trust one another, to communicate, and to remain calm under pressure. Ethan had learned from Jack that the key to leadership wasn't just solving problems. It was knowing how to connect with the team, how to recognize each person's value, and how to keep the ship running smoothly even in the toughest of times. As the days passed and the Venture continued its mission, Ethan's confidence grew. The crew worked together seamlessly, their bond strengthening with each challenge they faced. Jack's lessons had not only helped Ethan grow as a leader, but had also left a lasting impact on the entire crew. They were no longer just a group of engineers and sailors. They were a team. And every team member knew their worth and their role in the success of the mission. The ship's systems were running like clockwork, but it wasn't just the machines that made the Venture successful. It was the people aboard it. And Ethan knew that as long as they continued to work together, nothing could stop them. One evening, as the crew gathered for their final debrief, Ethan stood at the front, looking out at the men and women who had become his family over the past several weeks. They had fought the storms, both literal and metaphorical, and had come out stronger on the other side. "We've made it," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And we made it together. We've faced some of the hardest challenges this ship has ever seen, and we didn't just survive, we thrived. But none of that would have been possible without each one of you. You all brought something to the table, and we built something that no one can take from us. I'm proud of all of you." There was a moment of silence as the crew absorbed his words. Then, one by one, they nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with pride. The journey had not been easy, but they had made it. And they knew that whatever challenges awaited them in the future, they would face them as a team. As the meeting concluded, Ethan stepped outside onto the deck, breathing in the salty air. The journey had been long, but it had changed him in ways he couldn't quite explain. He had learned so much about the ship, the crew, and himself. And he knew that Jack had been the key to it all. Jack had taught him that leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about understanding the people you're leading, the systems you're working with, and the mission you're carrying out. He had shown Ethan that the real strength of any team came from the trust and respect they had for one another. As Ethan looked out at the vast, endless ocean, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of everything they had accomplished together. And as they sailed into the future, Ethan knew that the lessons they had learned would stay with them, guiding them through whatever storms came their way. The USS Venture had become more than just a ship. It had become a testament to the power of teamwork, of resilience, and of leadership. And with that thought in mind, Ethan stepped forward, ready to lead the crew into the next chapter of their journey. This emotional story follows the journey of a ship and its crew as they face challenges at sea. With teamwork, leadership, and a deep understanding of the mission, they overcome obstacles that test their strength and unity. Through stormy seas, engine malfunctions, and the wisdom of a veteran, they learn that the key to success is not just in technology, but in the connection between each member of the crew. As they navigate through adversity, this emotional story highlights the importance of experience, respect, and trust in a team. The emotional story captures the essence of leadership, showing that true strength comes from understanding the people you lead and the mission you serve. From the calm after the storm to the final triumph, this emotional story exemplifies how a team, guided by the wisdom of one man, can conquer the impossible. With every decision, every challenge, the crew of the USS Venture proves that even in the harshest conditions, the strength of the team can prevail. This emotional story will resonate with anyone who understands the power of teamwork and leadership.